End grain cutting boards, like this one here that I'm working on, are really, really cool, and they're not real hard to do, but there are just a couple of tricks I want to show you that'll turn a conventional butcher block glue up like this one into a cool end grain cutting board like this one. Prepare your material like you would for a regular butcher block, and what that means is use a hardwood, not a softwood, and closed grain woods are better than open grain woods. Get the parts so that you know that they're going to close against each other. In other words, these faces that I'm gluing together need to be nice and smooth so that we have a good glue joint. Speaking of glue, that's a big deal. I like to use a waterproof glue on cutting boards. More importantly, want to make sure it's a glue that's FDA approved for food contact so that we're making something that's safe to handle food on. Using a rag that's nice and wet, I'm getting the excess glue off the top of my glue up here. That's going to make the next step a whole lot easier if I remove all that excess squack now instead of doing it later. And I'm going to flip this over, and I'll also get as much glue as I can off the bottom. Once the glue is dry, your glue up can come out of the clamps. Now, what we've got is a surface that's okay but not great. This isn't very flat. It needs to be dead flat because we're going to end up gluing each of these pieces face to face to face in the next step. So take this piece, send it through a surface sander or send it through a planer until both faces are perfectly flat. Let's talk a little bit of math here. My blank is over 13 inches long. Now here's what I want to figure out is how long my finished cutting board is going to be. So here's the way to think about this. My blank is an inch thick. If I do my cuts, which will happen in this direction now, at 1 inch, I'm going to get about 13 of those. I'm going to take each of those pieces and turn it 90 degrees, stand it on end, and glue everything back together. So if I produce 13 pieces, and my board's 1 inch thick, that 1 inch gets added to the next inch, the next inch, the next inch. I'll end up with a finished cutting board that's about 13 inches long. If I make that dimension bigger, let's say I do these cuts at 1.5 inches, I'll get fewer pieces, a thicker cutting board when I'm done, but it'll also be shorter. So work with those two numbers to figure out what you want to do, where you want to make this cut. Then the next step is do a squaring cut on your table saw to get a nice straight end across here. That freshly cut end is going to go against your fence, and then we're going to make cut after cut after cut to produce the pieces that we're going to put back together to make our end grain cutting board. I've got all my parts cut on the table saw. Next, I'm ready to walk through getting all of these pieces glued back together to make up that end grain cutting board. I'm using a caul here at the end of the glue up, which is just one of the cherry pieces left over from when I made up the first blank. Now what I need to do is rotate a piece 90 degrees. That gets the end grain pointing up. Then on this next piece, I'm going to flip it end for end, and that's going to give me a contrast. So I rotate it 90 degrees and flip it. Now I have ash to cherry. I'll work that same pattern all the way down through the glue up, rotating every other piece. That's all set. Now we just wait for glue to dry. While the glue is drying on my other cutting board, I'm going to start the sanding process on this one that I was working on earlier. I'm starting with a real aggressive sandpaper here. I've got 60 grit paper on my random orbit sander. Make sure that as you work on this, you keep moving across the whole surface. Don't just try to concentrate on one gluey area because you'll end up with a real uneven cutting board. The goal is to try to take the whole thing down at a uniform rate so it's nice and flat when you're done. Start with aggressive paper because, of course, hardwood is hard, end grain is really hard, and if you start with too fine a grit, you're going to be here for the rest of your life sanding on this. So I'm going to keep working on this one, then we'll come back and have a look at what it looks like after the sanding process. It's going to take a while, but invest the time, get your cutting board looking nice, take it all the way up through the progression of grits like you normally would. I've sanded this one all the way up to 180. Remember that on end grain work like this, it has to be sanded, it can't be planed. So take your time, do a good job, get all those scratch marks out, all the glue residue off, then we're ready for finish. Mineral oil is a great choice for products like this. It's food safe. It's really a great selection for cutting boards. This is end grain, so it's going to soak up plenty of finish. My preference to get started is to simply pour it on and give it the opportunity to soak in. I'm going to start by spreading it around just with my hands because I don't want to soak any into a rag just yet. I want to make sure it goes into the wood. Isn't that cool as that finish hits? Look at the contrast that we're getting from the dark wood to the lighter colored wood. It really makes for a beautiful effect. Even as I'm working on it here, you can see it start to develop dry spots. So I'll just keep moving the mineral oil around and let it absorb. Keep working the mineral oil into that surface. Make sure it's good and saturated. And in fact, you're going to know you've got enough on this side when you see it start weeping through on the other side. It is end grain, and it'll wick it right through there. So I'm ready to flip this one over, start saturating this side, make sure I've got finish on all the edges. End grain cutting boards look great. They work great. People love them. Make great gifts. So get started on this project in your shop, and you'll be chopping vegetables on an end grain cutting board in no time.